everyone. In this section, I'm going to talk about EIGRP authentication. We'll briefly go over its purpose, a couple of options, and then we'll go through and do the configuration. So with EIGRP authentication, what we want to do is we want to maintain a stable routing topology. Right? We want to ensure that a router can't be added to our network that causes a loop or redirects traffic. Basically, it changes our routing tables in a way that we don't want to have happen, whether that be an accidental introduction or an on purpose, someone does it on purpose to cause issues on your network. So we configure authentication as just sort of a basic level of security for our EIGRP updates. Remember, we have EIGRP Classic Mode and Named Mode. Classic Mode EIGRP supports MD5 authentication only. Named Mode supports both MD5 and HMAC SHA-256 authentication. Let's go ahead and look at the configuration commands, and then we'll configure it and verify it. So here's just a look. There's a comparison slide here of MD5 authentication configuration. So on this side we have the Classic Mode, and on this side we have the Name Mode. The major difference here that I want you to see, okay, so in both of these we're going to configure keychains. And we may or may not, it's optional to configure lifetimes. We don't have to. Basically, it's start and stop times for when the key will be accepted and for when it will be sent with our update packets. But the major difference here is right in this section, and that is with Classic Mode, we do the configurations on the interface. So it'd be the interface connected to that, going out to that router that we want to authenticate with, as well as enabling the use of the keychain is configured on the interface. Whereas with Name Mode, it's configured within the EIGRP process inside the address family interface submode. So in this case, we're looking at the address interface. So we're still dealing with an interface connection, and we'll go through that. The difference is this is configured, Classic Mode is configured on the interface itself, the interface configuration. Named Mode is in the address family interface configuration under the EIGRP process. And then we have our SHA-256 option, which is only available for named EIGRP. We can still create keychains. We can enable the use of the keychain, and we can configure lifetimes. If we don't configure lifetimes, they're just available forever until we actually manually go in there and change something. So we can do all of this. One other difference is we don't have to do these three things. So we don't have to use the keychain. And again, lifetimes are optional. We could, with HMAC, just do our authentication mode SHA-256 password and then just use the password here or the secret key here that we would keep just using. I'm going to show you the use with the keychain. One of the things about the keychain that I think is useful is that it's time-based and it won't disrupt the routing updates while we're changing to a new key. So if I just use this, I've got to change my password or my key. When I do that, it's going to disrupt things. Whereas if I use my keychain and I use my time-based options, I can go ahead and rotate the password or the key without disrupting my updates. So let's go ahead and look at the topology that we're going to be working with. Pretty basic, right? Just 3 routers. We're not actually even going to worry about this switch down here. We're going to configure authentication between R1 and R2 here, and I'm actually going to use MD5 here. See how well I can draw with my mouse? Not very well. And here I'm going to use our SHA-256. Okay? No reason other than to demonstrate that we can do both of them. Okay? And both of these are name mode. So the whole topology here is already running named mode EIGRP for IPv4 and IPv6. I'm going to go through just the IPv4 configuration because it's named mode. The same commands would just go under the IPv6 configuration to continue that on into authenticating by IPv6. And of course, if you're going to authenticate IPv4 between the routers, you're going to, you can go ahead and do that with IPv6 as well. In named mode, the commands would be the same. We put them under the address family, IPv6 address family interface. The difference, let me scroll up real quick. The major difference here, if you were doing in classic mode with MD5, would be that, whoops, instead of it saying IP, it would say IPv6 here. Okay, so let's go ahead and start configuring. Like I said, we'll do MD5 mode here, SHA-256 here. Only reason, nothing particular, nothing great, just to demonstrate that we can do both of them. If your device is capable of SHA-256, it is going to be more secure, so you might want to go that direction. All right, so let's start with R1. We'll configure R1, then we'll configure R2, we'll configure R3, and we'll verify what's happening. In the very first one, we should configure R1, and we should see our routing go down, our adjacency go down, because R2 isn't configured yet. All right, so I pulled the window over for R1. Let's go ahead and configure. We're going to use keychains on both sides. So let's configure our keychain. Keychain, I'm just going to call it chain 1. If I can spell chain 1. And key 1. And then our key string, which is going to be our password. And we'll just call it test pass 1. Obviously, you're going to want to come up with something more secure than this. Please don't everyone use test pass 1 everywhere. And let's go ahead and create, or let's go ahead and configure accept and send lifetime. So how long will we accept update packets with that particular key, and how long will we send them with that particular key? So if we do our accept, and like I said, these are optional. Should use tab complete to be quicker, huh? 00, whoops. So what we go, what is that, midnight? Or then month, or day, month, year for the start. And then we go the end of this accept time. I'm just going to go a month out before we use the next one. 1. All right, so you see this. Our accept lifetime starts midnight, January 1st, 2021, goes to midnight, February 1st, 2021, and hit enter. I'm going to have our send lifetime be the same, so I just hit the up arrow to bring that command over, and then we'll type send instead of accept. So that's key 1. Let's go into key 2. And we'll just make our key string test pass 2. And this time we're going to make our accept lifetime. We're going to have them overlap a little bit with our previous key, just to make sure we're good with our updates and hopefully we have no downtime. So our accept lifetime will be, let's say 2350. So 1150, February 1st, 2021. I moved my cursor out of the way, sorry. And we'll have it end the 1st of March at midnight. And the same thing with our send lifetimes. You don't have to do this. Again, like I said, it's optional. And you can create a number of keys. And I think that's it for this part. Actually, if I do a key space question mark, there's how many keys you could make. These are our key identifiers. We're not going to do that. That's just to go this far. So now what we want to do is we want to configure our mode, which will be MD5, and we want to apply our keychain to our configuration so it can go ahead and use our keys. So we have to go into our routing process. I have a routing process already running called example. And we're going to go into our address family. As I said, we're just going to do IPv4 now, but we can do the same thing for IPv6. My autonomous system number for this process is 1. Now we want to go ahead and go into the interface. So if I'm going to pull this away for a second. If we look at our interfaces, we're dealing with router 1's E0, or in this case it's gigabit. I always use E just to indicate that it's an Ethernet or a LAN interface. It's not a serial connection, just kind of a thing. I don't indicate the speed. You may be working on equipment while you're doing this, or have your own equipment that you work on. Your speed is different. In my case right now it's gigabit. When I wrote my picture, that's just the interface. The last part is 0. So in my case, I'm dealing with the 0 to 0 interface between R1 and R2. So if I go, right, AF, oops, I just hit AF dash interface. For me, remembers the gigabit, so G0/0. Yours could be 0/0/0, or whatever you have available to you. And we want to do our authentication mode this time is MD5. And and you can see right away that our neighbor went down. Our authentication keychain is chain 1. And it's going to stay down until I configure R2 so that they match. Whoops, no space there. Okay, so we can exit out of here. We're done with R1. Let's go into R2. And you can see that R2 is showing us we have an authentication failure. That's good. That's what we're wanting to have, at least right now. Now let's go ahead and configure our keychain and our authentication. So we're going to start with creating our keychain and configuring our keys. So keychain, wow, that was terribly misspelled. Again, chain 1. And then our first key, the key string is test pass 1. Obviously the key strings have to match on both sides. And then oops, we had lifetimes, didn't we? We did lifetimes in there, so let's go ahead and do that. Accept lifetime midnight, the 1st of January 2021 until midnight the 1st of February 2021. And with the up arrow, we're going to send the key during that time frame as well. Now we'll go to key 2. And the key string is test pass 2. Again, don't use these basic passwords that I'm using. Oops. And then we'll use our accept lifetime of 2350 or 1150, the 1st of February 2021. That's the start of when we'll use that. And we'll end using that at midnight. Whoops. Oh, goodness. The 1st of March 2021. Boy, I have fat fingers going on here today. And we'll do the same thing for our send lifetime. So we'll accept and send that key during those times. Times and dates, I should say. Now, assuming I don't have a typo, hopefully I don't. Let's go into our routing process and go ahead and apply our keys. So let's go ahead and enable the authentication mode and enable the use of the keychain. Example is the name of my routing process. The address family we're dealing with is IPv4. Remember this stuff here was pre-configured because we're only dealing with authentication right now. And our authentication mode. Whoops, gotta go into the interface first. AF-interface. And here again, this is gig, in my case, 0. So it's going to be the 0 interface here. Because we're dealing right now with we're configuring R1. R1's connection, we're configuring R2 because we already configured R1. So now we got to configure R2's connection with R1. So that's our 0 interface. authentication mode, MD5. And then our authentication keychain is chain 1 that we configured. And we notice we get our adjacency up now because our authentication is configured correctly on both sides. And if we do a show IP EIGRP address dash family. Oops, sorry, I don't want the IP in there. I'm so used to doing a show IP. Show EIGRP address family and IPv4 interface detail our gig0 G00 interface. That's what we configured. We can see that our authentication mode is MD5 and the keychain is chain 1 that it'll be using. If we do a show keychain, we can look that key 1 is test pass 1 and it is currently valid. So that's the one we're using right now. We're going to stay on R2, and what we want to do with this now is configure our connection between R2 and R3. Remember I said we'll use SHA-256 for this, but we are still going to use keychains. Remember, I'll hit it when we hit that command too. Let me do that. So we're still going to use keychains. We're going to use the same keychains that we have on R2, so we won't have to reconfigure them. All we need to do now is apply those keychains to our interface in interface configuration mode on the router EIGRP process. So config T, router EIGRP example, address family, IPv4, and our autonomous system number, and then our interface in this case now is the 1 interface, in my case gig01. And we have our authentication mode. Spell it even closer and then it will work better. Authentication mode. And then if you look, you still have to put a password in there, but it will actually use the keychain if I apply the keychain. But I don't have to use keychains. I could just use this command without using the keychain. We are not going to. We're going to use our keychain. But I'm still going to give it a password anyway. I'm just going to call it HMAC pass. I want to make sure it's different so we're clear that we are using something different. Hit enter. And then our authentication, you can see our authentication went down with our router 3. Authentication mode. There we go. I'm sorry, I already did authentication mode. Brain work for a second. And we gotta do our authentication keychain. And again, it's chain 1. Enter. We are done with our config here on R2. Let's go to R3 so that we can get our neighbor relationship back up between R2 and R3. So the first thing we want to do is configure our keychains. I'm not going to configure the lifetimes on this one, just because we've already done it once. We don't need to keep doing it. And then our key string is, what do we say, test? Is it test pass 1? I hope I'm right. I forgot to write it down. And then we'll go key 2, key string test pass 2. Something to note that I realize I haven't talked about yet is a space behind this. So a space behind, leading spaces don't matter. So a space here, no big deal. A space here or anywhere after counts as part of the password. So if you do test pass 2 space bar, then that is actually the password. It's test pass 2 space. Space, then it's 2 spaces. So just remember that when doing your strings or your passwords, the leading white space doesn't matter, but the trailing spaces do. All right, so let's exit back out of here and router EIGRP example, right? Address family, IPv4, autonomous system 1. Then our AF interface, in this case, the interface connected between R3 and R2, I use the 1 interface, so that's, for my case, going to be G01. And then authentication. Wow. I should really always just use tab completely, seriously. Authentication mode. And I'll just use HMAC pass. And then our authentication keychain is chain 1. Assuming I didn't miss or forget anything, we should, there we go, get our adjacency back. And so we did get our adjacency back because now they're both using authentication, they're both using chain 1, and currently they're both going to be using test pass, sort of, because it'll use the first key, lowest numbered key. So now again, if we do a show EIGRP address family IPv4 interface detail, and our interface that we have it applied on, we can see that our authentication mode, SHA-256, our keychain is chain 1 again. Then if we do a show keychain, this time you can see both our keys are valid now to use the lowest number one first. But when you don't put the lifetimes in, they're valid, always valid, send and accept. So when my router 2, or my router 2 switches to key 2, that's fine, because key 2 can also use test pass, and it's valid to accept or send routing updates using that key. Again, just as a reminder, I only did MD5 and SHA-256 on the 2 separate links just to demonstrate it. I mean, you could. I mean, maybe you'd come up with an instance where you could only use MD5 on one side, but have the option to use the more secure SHA-256 on the other side. I don't know. But the reality is I only did here as an example so you could see both of them. With SHA-256, again, you don't have to use keychains. I chose to use a keychain and multiple keys. Oh, also, I just wanted to show that our routing is working. So I'm going to do a show IP route on R3 since that's what we have up. And what we should see is our routes, our EIGRP routes, but specifically the easy thing to see is our 192.168.3.0 coming from all the way over here on R1. And then that's it. We are done with this one. We know we formed a neighbor adjacency already because it came up and told us we did, so that's a good thing. And we do see our EIGRP routes, and specifically the one I pointed out, even though I know they're all there, I just point out the very far end one, which is that. So we are done. We have EIGRP authentication running. We could do a debug EIGRP packets. We could do something interesting. Let's go ahead and let's see if we can. Let's go ahead and break it for a second. See if we can do it while our debugging's wrong, because I got like everything running. Debug config T router EIGRP. Right, let's get rid of this here for a second. I lied. I'm gonna get rid of this. Let's do a UAll to get rid of the undebug. Oh, sorry guys. I was just gonna show you what it looks like when authentication, other than it's telling you it's down. Let's say, because once you get that initial one message, you might not get another message, right? So I was going to show you, but then I realized I'm not fast enough to go faster than these packets. So let me get rid of my debugging. All right, pause it for a second so you didn't have to deal with the little mess I created there. Now let's go ahead. Don't worry about that. That's because I stopped the interface. So now, if we go back, everything was working fine. It is working fine. But let's remove our keychain and our authentication, or remove our authentication, and then look at what debugging the packets looks like, just quick. So I'm just removing it just to see what it would look like if you were troubleshooting. So it goes down, and that's fine, but it's not going to keep telling me it's down. So if I debug EIGRP packets, then I can see that one of the problems we're having is our authentication. We ignored a packet from our neighbor because our authentication is off. They have authentication on, ours is off. So, and there could be other authentication issues. You could have a mismatched password or key, and then you would see something about that in your EIGRP debug EIGRP packets. So that's a pretty useful command. Anyway, we are done. I'm going to move over to R1 just to give you a whole view of the commands, or just show you what it looks like in the show running config. So again, we've got our keychains and our acceptance and lifetimes for key 1 and key 2. And our two keys are our passwords, test pass 1, test pass 2. And you can ignore all this other stuff. And then we go into our EIGRP process, and that's where we see that our authentication mode and our keychains are configured. And that is really truly it for this one. I hope it was helpful to you.